Of Metzia Daf Pezayin Amud Aleph, Halacha and societal norms, Ein Shualim Bishlom Isha. One of the challenging things in Halacha is to be able to manage the natural tensions between Halacha and societal norms. Halacha has been written down throughout the ages, starting from thousands of years ago until today, and continues to be written, but it's written down. There are some very clear guidelines as what's okay halachically and what is not okay halachically. And sometimes there's a tension between what Halacha requires and the societal norms of the time. The Mishnah Berurah at the very beginning of Shulchan Aruch talks about how one has to be as kanamer. You've got to be as strong-willed as a leopard, as a tiger, being willing to do the will of Hashem, and not to be worried about what people think of you, what people say about you, how people mock you. You've got to do what's right. And on the other hand, there are times when we see that what is right is partially defined by what is a societal norm. It's not that you don't have to do what's right when there's a societal norm against that. The question is, halachically, when is what's right decided with input from what is accepted in society at the time? And that's one of the things that it's very difficult to learn from the halacha itself. That's one of the things one learns from shimush talmidei chachomim, from working with, living with a talmid chacham, seeing a talmid chacham operate. As I've often mentioned to you, the greatest privilege of my life and what made all the difference is the opportunity I had to live in the homes of Gedolei Yisrael, of the great people of our generation, and to be able to watch them functioning and question them when I saw them functioning in a way that I didn't understand, and being able to understand how they manage this tension, how they manage this balancing act. And we have a piece of that in our Gemara. Vayomru elav vayeh Sarah ishtecha vayomer hinei va'ohel. We have a posuk in Vayera where the angels say to Avraham, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he says, she's in the tent. Tani Mishum Rabbi Yossi, we've got a Gemara that says in the name of Rabbi Yossi, Lama nakod al Aleph Yud Vav shebe'elav. There are dots in the Torah on top of the words Aleph Yud Vav in the word shebe'elav. Limdat Torah derech eretz. The Torah wants you to pause there and understand that apart from reading the narrative, you've also got to understand a principle of derech eretz. And we'll understand clearly what derech eretz means. Shish'al adam b'achsanya shelo. That when you're staying with somebody, you engage in polite conversation with them. You ask them how they are. And in this case, Sarah is part of the achsanya. You're not only being hosted by the man, you're being hosted by his wife as well. And it's polite to ask about her. Where is she? Where's the Rebbetzin? Didn't Shmuel say, Ein shualim bishlom isha klal? You're not allowed to ask a man about his wife. It kind of looks odd. What are you interested in his wife for? Why does it make a difference to you? It's inappropriate. If you're asking how she is through her husband, that's different. We had the same statement of Shmuel back in Kiddushin on Daf Ayin, where Shmuel said, Ein shualim b'shalom isha klal. The same statement was made by Shmuel back in Kiddushin. And there Rashi says, Ein shualim b'shalom isha, shema mitoch she'elat shalom, yiyu regilim ze'em ze al yedei shlucham, that even if you ask through somebody else, the fact is in a society where when men and women have little or no contact with one another, if they're not part of the same family, for a man to send a message to a woman, how are you, how is she, it implies interest. It implies caring. And we all want to feel that there are people who care about us. We all feel good when somebody inquires about us. But with women, it seems to be often even more important. Women who so often, certainly in the society at that time and in some societies today, sometimes aren't seen, aren't recognized. Women who have a need to feel secure in every sense. When somebody says, a man says, how are you? It means even more to a woman than it does to a man. That he's interested, that he noticed she wasn't there, that he asked about it. And even long distance, there's a connection that's created by that inquiry. And that connection is a connection that the Torah is concerned about as being inappropriate. That can bring them to love. Isn't that amazing? Just asking about a woman. A man and a woman just caring about each other enough to send a message and say, I just wondered where you were. I didn't see you today in shul today. Just that is enough to create a bond. Just look at how delicate and fragile and deep human bonds can be between people. And if it's that way with another woman, how much more so with one's own wife, that one has to realize that it's important, that she wants to be noticed if she's there, missed if she's not there. This is something that's important. It's so important that with a strange woman, one can create love just with that. How much more so to sustain love in one's own relationships. And Shmuel said, "Ein shualim b'shlom isha klal shemargil liba v'da'ata etzlo," because it creates a connection that isn't really very good. So we have two acharonim that we're going to learn today. One from the Sephardi world and one from the Ashkenazi world. Both who lived at exactly the same time, the second part of the 19th century. The first is the Ben Yehoyada, who we've spoken about before, but not for some time, who's the Ben Ish Chai, is known in the Sephardi world as the Ben Ish Chai, which is a sefer he wrote on Chumash with all the halachot that come up in the various parshiot. And he was a Rov and one of the great tzaddikim of that period of time, the 19th century. He was in Baghdad, and he asks, "Im kein eich amar Elisha legechazi, ata rutzna likrata." This is the Ben Yehoyada on the Gemara in Kiddushin. How could Elisha then have said to Gechazi, to his servant, "Go and find the Shunamit, ve'emorla, and say to her, Hashalom lach, Hashalom li'isheich, are you well? Is your husband well? Hashalom li'yeled, how's the boy doing?" V'atomer shalom, and she answered, everything is good. How could he inquire about how she is? That isn't appropriate. So there is a Ritvo which sets the direction. The Ritvo is at the very end of Kiddushin when he talks about the laws of Yichud, the laws of appropriateness between men and women. And one of the things he says there, "V'chein hilchata dehakol kafi ma she'adam makir ba'atzmo." It's important for a person to know himself in deciding how far to take these various halachot. Im ra'ui lo la'asot harchaka liyitzro oseh. A person should know that if he finds that he is sexually triggered by light interaction with women, then he must create a distance. Even looking at a woman's clothes can be forbidden. But if he's a person who's mastered his Yetzer Hara and it doesn't get in the way at all, such a person is allowed to look at a woman that he's not related to, and he's allowed to ask a man how his wife is doing. All of these things, which Shmuel says, for example, is asur, the Ritva says it depends who you are. And that's why we see that there's certain Tanoim and Amoraim who did things that we wouldn't normally do. Then he goes on to say in the third last line, only a great chosid who really understands himself should follow this way. This is the Ritva, a Rishon, talking about the Rishonim of his time, saying not every Talmid Chacham is on that kind of level that he can say, it doesn't apply to me. And the story is now famous of a cousin of mine who went to his grandfather, Rabbi Lapin, in Kfar Hasidim, and he said, I'm going into Haifa. Do you need anything? To Shabbos, I'll go and get it. He said to him, "You're going into Haifa? You're not afraid?" And he was worried maybe there had been a terrorist bomb or something. He said, "Afraid of what?" He said, "Haifa, the way people walk around, the way people are dressed in Haifa." He says, "I'm 90 years old at that time and I'm blind in one eye. I wouldn't risk going into Haifa because when a person's great, his Yetzer Hara is also great. He's alive, he's youthful, he's vibrant, he's vital. Even a 90-year-old man says, I wouldn't go into Haifa. It would be damaging to my neshama to see the way people wander around in Haifa. How do you go as a young man? How are you going to go into Haifa?" So the Ritva says in his day even the Talmidei Chachomim in his day have to be careful. You can't just be makel that. And we kind of take these things for granted because we've become so desensitized to it that it kind of doesn't affect us. That tells us where society is. That we and society have got to a level where we're so blunt that we don't even feel the impact of what it is to be exposed to what we see, both in the way people dress and behave, the billboards and the media that we expose ourselves to, each time it damages our neshama. There can't be kedusha in an environment like that. One has to be able to insulate oneself from it, and it's very difficult. So that's the Ritva, who kind of opens the door to saying this is somewhat dependent on situation, depends on who the person is. And it's important in this to understand the difference between a D'oraisa and a D'Rabbanan. We've spoken about the D'Rabbanans before, that the Torah is a perfect system. The world is an imperfect system. The D'Rabbanans, the laws of the rabbis, are there to align the perfection of the Torah with the imperfection of the world and make it work in an imperfect world. In a perfect world, you wouldn't need Gezerot. But in an imperfect world, you need gezerot of the rabbis. But another difference is that when we have a law in the Torah, it's an axiom around which the world was designed. You can't mess with it. It's like a law of physics. You can't say gravity sometimes applies, sometimes you can ignore it. Depends on how strong you're feeling, depends on what mood you woke up, depends what town you live. You can't say that. Gravity is gravity. And the laws of the Torah are laws of nature. They're laws by which the world was designed, and you can't manipulate the laws of the Torah much at all. You can apply them, and it's the role of the poskim to apply them very carefully. But the laws of the Rabbanan are not axioms in that sense. The laws of the Rabbanan are about an idea. The laws of the Torah are about an action, about a thing, about a mitzvah, about an isur, about an avera, about a chiyuv, an obligation, or something which is prohibited. But the laws of the rabbis, there's a reason for them. There's rationale. There's philosophy behind them. And you've got to take that into account when you apply them. So the Ben Yehoyada takes this further in his answer to his own question. Bear in mind the Ben Yehoyada, who was as I said, was one of the greatest tzaddikim. Everybody agrees, even those who weren't happy with his psakim. Rav Ovadia Yosef, for example, a Sephardi chief rabbi, wasn't all that happy with the Ben Ish Chai because he used to use Kabbalah in his psakim. He would sometimes paskin against the Shulchan Aruch like the Ramah. He was a very original thinker. And some of the Sephardi poskim say he is the posek of that door, and some are not that happy with him. Even the Ben Yehoyada, who was but everybody agrees that he was one of the greatest tzaddikim of the time, such a great tzaddik, he wouldn't employ a servant between the ages of 12 and 60. They used to employ servant girls in Baghdad. It was the normal thing to do. In his home, they had to be under 12 or over 60 because he was worried about himself. He didn't want to be around an attractive woman or a woman who he might for a moment notice, even that's such a great tzaddik. He didn't want to expose himself to that. So bear that in mind when the Yehoyada teaches us what he does. And he says, "V'nirili b'siyad dishma lahai klala dishmur lete ela beish nochri she'ena matana ve'en lo hitkarvutima she'ena makira." There should be ve'en lo hitkarvutima. This is talking about somebody who's strange to you that you don't have a relationship with. Their Shmuel says you can't ask her who she is, how she is, or greet her. Because if you have no connection with her, why are you asking about her? What's happening all of a sudden? Why the sudden interest? Etc. But somebody who's related to this, but if either a relative or somebody you've been a guest of in her home, you can't apply the halacha and ignore the hostess because you're a tzaddik. I won't say good morning, I won't say thank you very much, I won't say how are you today, because it says you don't speak to women. Then don't stay in the home, then sleep in the street or find a hotel. If you're going to stay in somebody's house, you're a guest of the balabosta, you're a guest of the woman, and you treat her with respect. If you ask how she is, she's not going to interpret that as anything more as politeness. Because you have to engage with her. You can't live in somebody's house and ignore the woman. That's what's normal, that's what's expected. Why doesn't the Ben Ish Chai say, tough? The Mishnah Berurah says you've got to do what you have to do even if people mock you. And Shmuel said you can't ask how a woman is and you can't engage in conversation with a woman. So tough, if you're in somebody's home, that's how it is. That's the meaning of Derech Eretz Kadma Torah, and we've spoken about that before. The Torah was given within a predetermined framework that came before the Torah, and that's Derech Eretz. That's the way people need to engage with one another. And that's part of Halacha. You've got to use Derech Eretz in the interpretation of Halacha, particularly when it's Derabbanans, when you're dealing with halachot that are put there to make life work. We're not talking about the oraisas. We're talking about the rabbanans, where the rabbis have instituted a law in order to make the Torah work in a society. There you've got to look at the society. And there's such a thing as derech eretz v'nimus ha'olam. And we've seen cases in the Torah where Moshe understands it. Even though Hashem says, you need to go and sort out Midian, he sends Yoshua because he knows that he benefited from Midian. There's hakoros hatov. There are principles of derech eretz that you can't use the Torah as an excuse to be impolite, to do something which is against Derech Eretz. How can you be unappreciative to a woman who's hosted you? If you then meet her the next day in the street, in the supermarket, and you don't say good morning. Yesterday you're in her home and she's serving you dinner, and this morning you ignore her. What kind of behavior is that, says the Ben Ish Chai? This great tzaddik who wouldn't employ a servant between 12 and 60. Listen to what he says, how important that is. And he says that's what's with Elisha. He was a guest in her home. Once you're a guest in her home, anybody who opens their home to somebody else, you owe this person your life. The concept because she's a woman, it doesn't apply. Absolutely, it applies. You've got to handle your own Yetzer Hara, do what you need to do, but you've got to behave within the norms of Derech Eretz. My father told me that once when he was studying in Basel during the war, Rabbi Elia came to speak in Basel. Rabbi Lapin came and stayed at the same place as my father was staying, with a friend of the family, a wealthy man in Basel. After dinner, Rebellia was getting up, and the host was getting up. Rebellia was going to the shul to deliver his sermon, for which hundreds of people were going to come and listen. They're about to go out, and Rebellia turns to the hostess and says, "What about you? Aren't you also coming?" She says, "Yes, but I've got to just clean up and wash up. You go, and I'll come afterwards." And Rebellia said, "Oh no, you don't come afterwards. You do what you need to do. We wait for you. When you're ready, you come with us." That's the great Rabbi Lapin, the tzaddik Rabbi Lapin. There's no less in the laws of Derech Eretz when it comes to a woman than there is to a man. The same laws of Derech Eretz apply. Halacha is different, but Derech Eretz is not different. And that's pasken by the Aruch HaShulchan, the Nevarid Ocharov, the Aruch HaShulchan, one of the great poskim of that time. So you've got the Ben Ish Chai in Damascus, you've got the Aruch HaShulchan at the same time, and the Aruch HaShulchan brings this as well, and says, "Ein shualim b'shalom yishak klal afil yedei shliach." He brings the law of Shmuel, and he brings Rashi, d'shema mitoch she'elat shelo, she'yavo lidei chiba, it can bring one to love, and so on. Since the whole reason is it can cause connection and attachment, you can certainly say good morning to a woman. It doesn't. You don't show too much interest. You don't engage, but just to say good morning, absolutely you do. And certainly when it comes to family, you ask about your children, your grandchildren, your daughters-in-law. This is something you do. Based on the Ritvo, and he says, "V'lachein matzinu be'Elisha she'amar lemisharto rutzna likrata ve'emor la shalom lach ach misham ein raya." He wants to say maybe from Elisha there's no proof dal pi hadibor asa hakol, because he was a Novi and Hashem told him what to do. Can't bring a proof from Elisha. And then he says, but no. Yes, you can bring a proof from Elisha. Don't answer Elisha was a Novi, Elisha was different. Why is it in the Tanakh? It's in the Tanakh so that you can learn that's midat derech eretz. That once you've benefited, once somebody has hosted you in their home, there's a different set of derech eretz. A strange woman in the street, yes, you engage in conversation. That looks inappropriate. That is inappropriate. But if it's somebody you've been in her home and she's hosted you, there's a different level of derech eretz altogether. Just an example of how we've got to manage this natural tension between what the Halacha expects of us and what society expects of us. There are times where we cannot accommodate. Halacha is clear and strict, and society has gone crazy. We just have to look around today. We don't have to adjust to the craziness of society. But where society is on track, And there are matters of derech eretz, there are matters of what we call derech eretz, and one needs a level of gadlut, a level of greatness to be able to navigate these areas and to be able to understand what is derech eretz and what isn't, al pi Torah, and where does the halacha accommodate the derech eretz and where doesn't it. And that's the kind of thing one learns from shimush talmidei chachemim, which is why the Torah tells, the Gemara tells us, gadol shimusha yoter milimudah. It's even more important to serve a Talmid Chacham, to have an apprenticeship with a Talmid Chacham, than it is to learn the facts. Because from the apprenticeship you learn not only what to do in terms of what's in the halacha, but how to live halacha in a normal society, in the world as such, in a way that is a kiddush Hashem, in a way that people admire and respect.